Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm honored to bring you the premiere of Witchcraft and Theurgy, hosted by the one and only Brandy Williams. And we will be talking about what this show is all about and where it's going to be going. Greetings and welcome, Brandy. How are you?
I'm really great. Thank you, Hercules. And thank you for hosting this. It's a very exciting endeavor, and I'm really glad that you support it.
Oh, I'm 100% behind it. I think that these conversations should be had, and this is a great place to start. I'm trying to start some other conversations also in exploring how theurgy is used by different groups. And I have a fondness for the outer space spirituality. So a conversation will be starting there next month. But you, as always, are the pioneer and the visionary. So thank you again for acting as our muse in these endeavors.
You know, and since you mentioned the UFO conversations you've been having, it's been coming up over and over in my environment. I was just in a class where someone mentioned Jeffrey Kripal co-wrote a book with Whitney Schreiber on the subject of UFO, like theurgy, essentially. So it's very interesting. Yeah, it's in the air. We'll put that aside. I'm looking forward to those shows as well. This one's about witchcraft, though.
Now, by witchcraft, do you mean Wicca? Do you mean folk magic? What? Because that term has come to become very fuzzy again. So when you talk about witchcraft, what are you talking about?
That is such a great question, and something that I want to do. This is actually a show where we'll be interviewing other people. So we'll be having guests come on, and I have a set of questions to ask them. And that's probably the very first question I'm going to ask everyone. You know, do you identify as a witch, and what do you understand as witchcraft? And so for the overarching definition of witchcraft, really, my definition of everything is whatever you define it as is right, is real. So my definition of a woman is anyone who says that she is a woman. My definition of a witch is anyone who says that they are a witch. So I can talk a little bit about what that means to me, how I came to witchcraft, and sort of my understanding as it has changed over time. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I'm working on a blog post now about being both a witch and a magician. When I became a witch in 1974, that was a long time ago. In 1974, you could have the books that were written about witchcraft on your shelf, and it took up this much space. There was just nothing. We were just starting. Gardnerian witchcraft had just become available. It became available because Lady Sheba published the Book of Shadows, and that was published in 1971. So it was then possible for anyone to pick up that book and then create a line of witchcraft. The witchcraft that I was initiated into is Georgian, the Georgian line. And the Georgian line is like George Patterson. He gave his name to the tradition and took the name Pat. So his name is Pat Patterson. The Georgian line was the Book of Shadows from Lady Sheba, and then some other material that he'd pulled from other places. And there was like the white goddess and the golden bow. And that was it. Those were your sources. So once you'd worked through those 2 or 3, books available, what else were you going to do? And what people did immediately was go to ceremonial magic, because that had been around for 100 years. So in my generation, the people who came in just at this very beginning of the witchcraft boom, we were all witches and magicians. We were all studying the same thing. Since then, I mean, today, it would not be possible to read every book there is about witchcraft. There are libraries and libraries full of this, and witchcraft has become very specialized, very compartmentalized. And it's kind of interesting. I saw a conversation on Instagram between some of the priestesses who I follow, who said that there were people who identify as witches and then people who identify as priestesses. And if they identified as both, they lost one of their audiences. So I said, that's so interesting. For me, witch, priestess, pagan, magician, they were all the same thing. So it'll be interesting to see how people define that word and define their practice. So I think that's like the 5-second overview of like what is witchcraft. Whatever you say it is. I came in as a witch that used to be called traditional. It's not anymore. And now today there's this distinction also between witchcraft and Wicca, and a distinction between people who cast spells and people who are religious. And to be perfectly honest, almost all the people who are identifying as witches now, and there are a ton of people, there are 1 million people in this country who call themselves witches. About this many have read a book or talked to somebody else about it. It's really more like an ethos, right? A way
Yes.
of dressing. They're serious. They're very serious about connecting with nature and connecting with the spiritual side of Wicca, but they don't have a connection with what's come before, with the traditions. So I'm actually really interested in finding some folk like that to come in and talk about what it's like to come in like today. If you walked in off the street today and said, I am a witch, what's that like? How did you find it? I'd be very interested in that conversation.
That would be an interesting conversation. I remember when I was first introduced to Wicca, it was in the, I guess, 70s, when I was in high school. And back then I was rebelling against my Greek heritage, and I was seeking wisdom in outside places. And I encountered the folks who were into Wicca, and they were into tattoos and piercings and all sorts of other stuff as well, and having conversations. So I read some of the books that were out at the time, and you're right, there weren't very many, there were just a few. And I talked to them, and the closest thing I could identify with was a famtrad, they used to call it. I don't know if they still call it that. And I could identify with that because in Limnos, they had a lot of these customs. They were jumping over bonfires, and they had old women who would come, like if someone with the evil eye on you, and anoint you with olive oil and chant, and so all this stuff. But they didn't believe the Wiccan lore that was there. In fact, in Limnos, Striglas were not human. They were a class of entity akin to satyrs and centaurs, in that they were partially donkey. So the Striglas, the stories went, when you were walking alone up in the mountains, far away from people, the traveler, usually a lone male, would see 3 lovely women dancing, and they were dressed in very transparent clothing. So of course they would find this very arousing and watch this dance. And then at some point, invariably, one of the women would kick her leg, and he would see that it's the leg of a donkey, and he knew that they were Striglas casting spells. I knew people did the things that they did in Greece because it was a form of medicine that they considered to be very old. And once, when I caught a pneumonia and I went to a regular doctor, he told me somebody put the eye on me and that I should get one of these people to chant over me. Here it was diagnosed as walking pneumonia when I came back and I saw a doctor here, but there somebody, so I always find the word interesting because it's a deliberately maligning word. Like Greek, for a Greek, the word Greek is a maligning word given to us by the Romans. And Greeks don't think of themselves as Greeks because that's not what we are. We're Hellenes. But everybody else were Greeks because the Romans called us, Greeks. And so it's the same type of thing. So that led to interesting conversations. I never quite identified with paganism either. Like paganism as I observed it, even with the Reconstructionism. So these words, is somebody a witch? Are they not a witch? Are they a witch and a magician? Are like warlock. I see that coming back now. For a while, that was a bad word to be. Warlock's a traitor. It's not a male witch. But now it is again.
Yeah, and witch also has that connotation, the anthropological connotation of the people who are ostracized by whatever culture, right? So I was kind of interested, the kind of thing that you talked about, the striga, that's kind of how anthropologists see, that's the word they translate as witch, right? The outcasts who are, or the negative figures in a culture. So that's I think part of the stigma around the word. And then of course, which was in the European tradition, in the Western European tradition, were the people who were persecuted by the church. There were people who were burned at the stake as witches. And I think part of what happened in the revival, there were 2 things that happened. One was that an anthropologist picked up those the trial records Margaret Murray picked up
Yeah.
the trial records and said, actually, what they were doing was a form of European folk religion. And she made that case. And then the second thing was, as people came in and picked up Margaret Murray's work, they said, oh, this is European folk religion. We're going to take this word and we're going to reclaim it. We're going to reclaim the religion as well. So I think that's how those things sort of came about.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like even with the Greek Reconstructionists, they're cherry picking traditions and practices, from the past, and then ignoring the more unsavory to us practices that they also practiced in antiquity. And I remember I stayed among that group of spiritually minded people for like a good decade. And eventually I just had to leave because whatever they were doing, it's fine, but it's not for me, what they're doing. And I got tired of calendar arguments and, and things like that. So again, bless them. What do you call it? They're walking the path of their understanding toward the gods, and that's never a bad thing. But that wasn't for me.
You and I are both people who have had an enormous amount of contacts with different kinds of people and different kinds of groups and experience with them. And it always cracks me up what people fight about. So calendars, that's an interesting thing to get all worked up about. So that's witchcraft. And then why I got interested in witchcraft and theurgy. So you and I have been working together since my publisher, our publisher, Llewellyn, put me together with you to promote one of my books. And I forget even which one it was because it was a while back.
It was For the Love of the Gods.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was a wonderful place
and
to
I
connect.
saw Brandy Williams, and I had read your earlier book, and I was like, oh, wow, Brandy Williams. I love her earlier book. It was such an original interpretation of heteras and, things like that. So I was very honored to be reviewing your book. And that started the whole theurgy conversation, which has been going on for like half a decade now.
It's longer than that, I think. Yes. So there was a festival in California that is now extinct, Pantheacon, and out of Pantheacon came a Theurgicon. So Gwen Turner created this conference because she was interested in theurgy, and theurgists would come through and make presentations at Pantheacon. Pantheacon was huge, and there were hundreds of presenters, but she pulled out those people who were interested in theurgy, and she ran this little, in the summertime, this little teeny conference, like 5 presenters, where we talked about theurgy. And that's where I met Bruce McLennan, who also is Apollonius and John Opsipeus. I met Tony Merzwicki. I actually also met Richard Reedy. I was fortunate enough to meet him while he was still alive, and Don Frew, and a lot of people. And we had these conversations, and then Theurgicon stopped happening. And I said, oh gosh, there's got to be a way to keep it going. And I said, wait a minute, there's Hercules. We could do a virtual conference. And so, you threw the party. You made it possible for us to talk weekly. And we had been talking weekly for at least 5 years, and not weekly, monthly, for at least 5 years. I think it's more than that.
And I'm glad that you're starting a regular show. Tony's had one. Tony Merzwicki's had one for a while now, Living in Linus Moss, and John Opsipeus, or Apollonius, as I call him usually. He and I have been doing this dance now to get a special together, so we're still discussing it. And Jean-Louis is way too busy with the editing and other things, so I'll reapproach him when that's finished.
Yeah, so it's really exciting what we're doing with Living Theurgy on that channel. It has come to be a group that I think we all express a lot of appreciation for each other, for being there for each other. And we've been able to have some really great conversations over the years and got into some pretty deep topics. So I think of us as being like one of the theurgy circles that used to happen in the ancient times. Although they were around a given teacher, but we're a circle of teachers. Those are really fun. And so I'm very excited about what we're doing now, because we've decided to bring more people on. So we're going to be expanding the number of people that we have those conversations with, and kind of get into, kind of diversify sort of our thoughts. Oh, I'm so sorry. Hang on a second. I'm going to mute. That was an alarm telling me it was time to make dinner.
Oh, okay.
I'm having dinner brought in, so we're covered. So I'm really excited by that. I'm excited by the new people who are going to come on and the new conversations that we're going to have, but also the continuation of the thoughts that we've had. We've built up a number of really important understandings of theurgy over the years, and we. I don't know. Are we allowed to talk about the book?
I don't know either. I've been asking very broad questions about the book or the project that we're
Right.
working on, but I'm trying to avoid specifics in terms of the information because I
So,
don't know either.
because I've sort of, mentioned it, there's a book project that all of us have kind of noodled around with. So we've been talking to each other, and that brought up a number of conversations about what is included in the topic of theurgy. And I came into the conversation saying, I see theurgy in the modern world, and I see it in the ceremonial groups where it's a thought, it's understood. The Golden Dawn and Ordo Templi Orientis and Aurum Solus are all performing theurgy, but this also is the source of witchcraft procedures, like drawing down the moon, and also what happens in the pagan world, where pagans aspect deity. And I see these as historically and lineally connected. But when I started talking about witchcraft and theurgy and saying, we could bring some witches on, there was kind of a pushback in the whole surround, yeah, I don't know, are witches really theurgists? So I said, well, let's throw down. Let's have a conversation with a number of witches talking about witchcraft and then theurgy. So anyone who identifies as both a witch and a theurgist, we can have that conversation.
And some witches, like I spoke with Starran Ravenhawk about your show, and she knew what theurgy was, and she knew that drawing down the moon was theurgical. So that understanding does exist among some people who identify themselves as witches. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That is one of those things that, oh, it's so obvious. Why didn't I see this before? And I can see people calling it theurgy in the very near future.
I hope so, because it's really hard to talk about theurgy because people don't really understand it. I want to say I didn't really understand it until I started researching it and writing about it. And I've been a ceremonial magician for all of my life, but the word flew over my head. I mean, I go back and look at the texts that I studied now, and they go, yes, we are doing theurgy and we are reading, Iamblichus. And it didn't register at all until I drilled down into Hellenistic religion, and then the Neoplatonists, and it came clear. The focus came clear, which is why I wrote Love of the Gods. For the Love of the Gods, the history and modern practice of theurgy, our pagan inheritance. I wrote that book because I wanted to explain to people that what we do now comes directly from this ancient inheritance. So I would really like to see people understand the word better, because it's hard to find another word that covers the territory. Theurgy, like in a compact word, gives you everything you need to know about both the method and the goal. And it takes a lot of explanation to get. I've done an entire day's worth of workshops to describe what that means, right? So I'd really love to see that happen.
I would love to see that happen too. And your book is brilliant. And it really, really is, because you humanize the theurgists. That is something you did. So they're no longer abstract historical personages, who did something. You really got into their humanity and shed light on their writings in a way that was very unique and very clear. And you also showed that the golden thread that went through all these people, or the golden chain, they weren't all, there wasn't an orthodox theurgy that each of them were espousing the same doctrine, let's say, but this was something, it was a deeper understanding that was colored by who they were and how they saw the world. So looked at as a phenomenon through time, you could see, it for what it was, but in the life of each individual theurgist, it wasn't always quite clear, even to the theurgist, what they were contributing toward this form of movement. And it's one of my favorite metaphysical books. And thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and your support has made such a difference to me over the years. It's one of the reasons that I republished it. It was a Llewellyn book, and it went out of print. It was critically acclaimed, but not particularly commercial. So I have a publishing company now, Mnemosyne Press, and I have republished it. So I'm really excited to be able to bring it back to people. And you were, a substantial reason that I did that. There were other people there. Dr. Megan Rose also said she wanted to refer it to it, so it needed to exist. So I brought it out.
It was part of my reading list, our reading list for the classes I held in the Amber Dragon back in the day. So
Yeah.
that was on the reading list, and it was something that everyone who read it fell in love with it.
So yeah, and so I kind of traced theurgy, and I connected theurgy up with the contemporary ceremonial magic practice that
Mhm.
grew out of it. But I didn't actually do so much to connect up witchcraft in that book. So that's, I think, the next thing, as the next piece that is published of mine is probably going to be this piece, the carrying deity in modern magical practice, which connects up witchcraft to that whole line. So again, that's why we're doing this. I want to get more voices in on theurgy in general, and then theurgy and witchcraft in particular. Ceremonial magic is this kind of world, and this many people are interested in it, that many books. Theurgy is like a little teeny piece of that.
Mhm.
Witchcraft is like this. Witchcraft is like the world, right? So connecting theurgy with witchcraft opens up the number of
Yes.
people who talk about it, evangelize the word, what it is, how we talk about it. So I think it's got some potential as a topic.
I definitely think so as well. Um, this just came into my brain, so I'm just going to throw it out. Somebody in the magical community referred to us, and what we're doing is your theomancer friend. What are you and your theomancer friends are? So I never thought of myself or anybody else as a theomancer. I knew what it means in Greek, but I didn't know how the word was being used in English, so I Googled it. And there is a term theomancer. How do you feel about being called a fellow
I'll
theomancer?
have to Google that. uh, Although in general, I like to grant people the right to self-definition, and I resist other
Other
definitions.
definition.
Yeah, yeah. So if somebody wants to define me, I'm like, no, I get to do that. You know.
That's how I see the world as well. That basically life is short. All of our labels are artificial anyway. They're created by a group of people to create a common reality that we can share. I grew up bicultural, and so the realities were quite different. And in first generation immigrants, there's a high degree of schizophrenia
Hmm.
because some of these differences are hard to reconcile. So in my case, I could either see the world as a Greek American, which is the culture I was raised into. I can see the world as a Greek by embracing the Greek way, because Greece had moved on since the Greek American culture was formed. I can see
Hmm.
it as an American because America had moved on since the culture was formed. I can go schizophrenic, or I could realize that it's all bullshit. That basically it's all a story that we've agreed to or were forced into living, and that stories can differ, and you have the freedom to pick a better story than the one that you're currently in. So I respect people's self definitions, and I embrace them as well.
And I've always kind of envied people who grew up Greek or grew up Greek American, because I've been sort of Greek adjacent for a long time. I went to Greece. I studied Greek and was able to speak Greek in country. I traveled to the sites, and then in this country, I would hang out at the churches where people danced and learned
Mhm.
the dances, and really love Greek food and that kind of thing. So, but I'm an outsider. The thing is, being an outsider in Greece isn't a bad thing. In some cultures it is, but in Greece you're really welcomed. There's this whole,
Hospitality, yeah.
hospitality to strangers. Yeah, that I always found to be true in country, and I find to be true in this country too. That oh, look, come on in, come dance with us.
You might
It's
be a
like,
goddess, you never know, or you might be a saint in disguise or something.
yeah.
That's still very much a part of the Greek culture. When I went to unknown areas like Crete, I was treated royally like a king wherever I went by people who didn't know me, and they would tell me all sorts of stuff about their folklore and about like sacred places that nobody knew about that I would then go and
Mm.
explore. So yeah, that welcoming is part of it, and the stories are told of when the gods, especially Hermes and Zeus, would travel in disguise and judge people and so forth. So that's still very much alive. Philoxenia. Um,
Yeah, and the thing is, it's such a lovely culture too. I mean, it's alive. it's a lively culture. There's so many dances. Every village has its own dance. The food is fantastic, and there's this sort of sense of joy in life in Greek culture. So, you know, if you're gonna pick a culture, Greek is a really good culture to be from.
I agree. It took me a while to realize that, but I agree. Now that I'm in my 60s, I've come full circle, and I realize now that everything I wanted is actually there from the beginning. uh, so I'm content with it. But traveling around taught me that the same thing can be found in other cultures. I spent like a good decade and a half studying the Hyperborean northern cultures, the Hesperian western cultures like the Celts, the American Indian cultures, Oriental cultures, and their spirituality. And
Mm.
it was like playing hide and seek with the forces that I grew up with, because I'd find them behind the cultural masks. So after a while, I got really good at identifying who was who through what. And I read a lot about the Greco-Roman custom of seeing their gods in other cultures, making those
Ah.
equivalencies. And they did that all the time. It wasn't cultural appropriation. It was just, oh, okay, here Hercules is doing this, or here Zeus is doing that. And we could learn from these stories. So I like that fact about Greek antiquity, that they were open to new ways of seeing the world and new ways of understanding the gods. There came when Typhon was invading and the Olympians fled to Egypt and they wore animal masks. So you had all those correspondences as well. And even now when I explore different cultures, it's like, who's Zeus here? You know?
Yeah, I love the stories about Proclus going on his journey when he had to flee Athens, and then coming back with a whole bunch of new gods, and he had a whole other calendar that he had to work as he honored them. So that was great. Yeah, and theurgy, I think one of the interesting things about witchcraft and theurgy is that we kind of tend to connect it to Greek culture, to Hellenistic culture, because that's where it came from. And theurgy is a Greek word, but the idea of carrying deity is a much broader one. And
Yes.
one of the things I think that can come out of a conversation about witchcraft and theurgy is that where else do we find those thoughts? You mentioned the Northern European traditions, and there's a very strong idea of carrying deity in the northern traditions. Diana Paxson and others have researched that and have resurrected those techniques. So that's one of the places that neo-pagans learn the technique of carrying deity, is through that tradition.
Yeah, it's an exciting tradition, very much alive. I taught runes for like a decade or so in New York City. I still remember Garum bays loud in Nipa Cave. The fetter shall snap and the whole front free. The future I fathom and further can see. The death of the gods, invincible gods. Would you know more? Great, great, great. The Eddas and all of the books that still exist, and really, really great tradition, very powerful.
And that's an interesting thing. We can put that on our list of people to go and try to bring to conversation with us. I don't know. Do you know Diana Paxson? Have you interviewed her for
No,
anything?
I've not. I might have
I
spoken to her at some point. I've spoken to very many people, but we did not connect if I spoke with her.
I know that she's been making some interview rounds recently because she wants to do other things, and maybe she doesn't want to talk about this. She kind of got typecast as the Norse goddess woman, and she'd like to do other things with her life. But it would be an interesting thing to have a conversation with her about it. She's older than us, actually, which as we age, that becomes more and more rare. And she's been around longer and has done so much for the community. So she'd be fun to talk to for sure.
I agree. We will track her down and invite her. You also
So
explore other traditions for theurgy. You're exploring Eastern tantric traditions, I believe.
yeah, and that's a very, very interesting topic, interesting conversation, because as I do get into the tantric practices, Hindu tantric and Buddhist tantric also, I see not just a direct correlation, but that this is theurgy. And when we talk about theurgy, we're talking about practices of bringing deity down into a person or a statue. And this is exactly what happens in Hindu practice. You have a statue in a temple, or you have a statue in your home. You bring deity into the statue, and then you interact with the deity through that. or you bring deity down into yourself, or bring deity out from yourself, which is interesting. And all of these practices are what the theurgists talk about. So as I learn the ancient practices and resurrect them, over here in this other tradition, I am learning these practices as a living tradition. And
Mhm.
I don't, the way my teacher puts it is, don't mix the streams. So we try to keep them clear. I'm clear and respectful of this tradition here, and clear and respectful of this tradition here. But I also see that they're really very, very allied. I mean, the esoteric tradition roots in India and in Kemet in Egypt, and comes to Greece, where it then comes forward to us. But there's this very strong connection in India to what we do. And looking at these practices and how they are done, it also gives me ideas over here about how to do these practices. And so it inspires me. Sometimes I'm with my teacher and I'm like, oh, I gotta explore that, and I go make a note, let's go see how that might work over in this place. So yeah, but I don't know that they don't use the term theurgy. The term they use is deity yoga, which
Okay.
is, theurgy is deity yoga. I mean, how you bring the deity
Well,
into yourself, and how you
that would work, because yoga means union.
yes.
So
Yes.
basically that would be the union, and then you're bringing it back into yourself, and I guess bringing it into the world, where it can act through you or through whatever you are shaping and bringing into the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had two sets of experiences. One Hindu, which I can't talk about, and that's the specific thing you can't talk about, right? There's a sense of secrecy around it. And then I've had a set of experiences with Buddhist deity yoga, which I can talk about. Tara Mandala in Colorado did a set of practices around Tara, around the 21 Taras. So I can talk about that. And it's the same kind of deity yoga. The idea, so the practice is that you visualize the Taras. There's like a wheel in like here. It's like the Lopan Chanda Easton talked about it as like a Rolodex of Taras. You have a Rolodex, like,
I like
oh,
that.
this Tara here, this one is the one for disease. Let's do her. Let everybody, and they'll put out a call. Okay, everybody work with this Tara here, work with the green Tara, and we're gonna work for the healing of the pandemic, right? So you have this Tara, and there's this Rolodex, but then you bring her down and you become her. Boom.
Mhm.
And now you are Tara, and you are sitting in her posture, and there's visualization. She's got a color, she's got gestures that she makes, and then there's a mantra. There's a phrase that you repeat. So you become this Tara. And in the Buddhist tradition, at the end of that set of practices, you then vanish. And she vanishes, and then you sort of dissolve, which is cool. And then you come back to yourself, and it's much harder to dissolve yourself than you might think. That's part of what the tradition is about. But yeah, so that's very much it. You've become deity, and you're expressing the deity. And then also there was around remember the forest fires? We had forest fires a little bit
Yes.
ago. They asked us to visualize that Tara going to the forests and dropping water on the forest, the Tara that they picked. So that also is a practice. And I think these give me direct ideas about how to go about doing theurgy in other contexts. So when I work with the Olympians, the set of Olympians, I can do those same practices. I can
Mhm.
imagine them on me. I can imagine them out in the world going and doing things in the same way, and they're light bodies.
That's very similar to two different practices. They sound combined over there, but I do something very similar. I called it putting myself in the story in the project that we're working on. But basically, sometimes I'll feed myself different interpretations of something. Like let's say I want to do an underworld journey. I have a introduction to it that I do that'll bring me there, but sometimes I'll play with that and I'll look through what is the underworld doing in comic books and video games, and you'd be surprised how prevalent it is in our popular culture. And I will immerse myself in that and consume that as a consumer, and allow it to permeate my inner self and merge with the images I already have, and they become richer and less predictable. So when I start my underworld journey, whether it's in dreams or in meditation, they liven. My inner self is not very static, but it frequently with me, I do this daily, at least once a day. I strive for twice. I connect with the highest Hercules I can conceive. And lately I've been playing with Theosophy and Nonus with his Cosmic Hercules of Tyre. And, those are the highest expressions of Hercules in our world. And even in a Marvel comic book, he became the All-Father at one point. So I look at how those ideas came together, and I'll feed myself these ideas, and then I'll connect with the highest that I can conceive of Hercules, and become that Hercules here to the best of my ability. And it's not, I don't like the Theosophical or the Hindu term Chela, because it
Mhm.
means slave. And I don't see this
Mm.
as being the slave of anyone or anything, because we're all one. So you're picking somewhere on that wheel that you described. You're picking something and you're tapping into it, and then you're bringing it here. And it's something conscious and deliberate. And you don't disappear in the way I do it. You don't vanish as yourself. You're empowered as yourself, because you're choosing to connect with something higher that's already in you, and then
Mhm.
to manifest it and bring it to action in the world. So what you're describing, I have to research it now, because it'll definitely enrich what I do.
And that I think is a really good cogent explanation for my understanding of the difference between the theurgy that I do and the theurgy and deity yoga, because in both the Hindu and Buddhist tantric traditions that I practice, the idea is essentially to dissolve yourself, to dissolve into the deity. And in the theurgic practice, my best understanding of the Neoplatonic worldview is that we have a line that goes from the highest divinity down to the manifestation here, the physical manifestation. And you're talking about connecting up the line, which is what theurgy does. So rather than dissolving ourselves into nothingness or dissolving ourselves into the deity, we connect up to we expand ourselves into
Right.
the highest possible deity. So I think that's a very interesting and very, very cogent explanation. And then when you were talking about stories, I recently I have to look it up. I made a note to myself. I ran across the idea that in the ancient cultures, people would go and find stories of Hercules and then enact them, like
Yes.
enact themselves onto the story of Hercules in their lives, right? So that's what you're doing.
I started that in high school. Well, actually, grammar school, but in grammar school, I didn't quite, it was groping toward it. But in high school, I used to write plays with Hercules. And I would, of course, be Hercules, but we'd enact them in writing class. And, so I got to do that. And that provided, I was never a magician in a conventional sense. I've played with magic and things. But that was how I first got an understanding of ritual. It was people basically assuming parts in a divine story, and they're telling the story through their actions. And by placing themselves in these various positions, both individually and collectively, a greater understanding, could arise, So,
Yeah.
and connect them with other energies or other perspectives or other like internal personas. So that's how I grew up toward it. In grammar school, I didn't quite know. I liked dressing up. My mother made me a Peplum Hercules costume, and she gave me a sword. So I was a little kid. I was walking around New York with one of these sword and
Pictures.
sandal movie
Oh,
things
you gotta have a picture.
with a machete. I used to. My aunt had the pictures, and we don't know what happened to them. But so the yearning toward that arose early, and I experimented with it in high school. And now I'm pretty much I channeled, or it's not. I'm not really lost in it though, because it's fully me. But I lead parades, interfaith parades, do the 4th of July celebrations, and I'm wearing like a fake lion pelt and, get all dressed up. I bless the town in the name of Mount Olympus. So it's become quite a thing. So I never quite get out of that, it's just another part of me, the way I view it.
And I'd love to take this as a note to continue in the other forum, in the general living theurgy forum, the enactment of story, because there are a couple of things that I was thinking about as you talked about that. One of them is the tantric practice that I do, the religious practice. There's a story called the Devi Mahatmyam, which is a story about the goddess and her battle with the great demons. It's I want to say 8th century text. So it's a great goddess text, and it's still chanted all around the world. And in the fall, there's 9 days, a festival called Navaratri. There's 9 days of the goddess, and we chant the text during that time. So basically, you're reenacting this story year over year. You're going back over it. This happened. The demon got this power, and then the goddess was called, and then she called all these other goddesses, and they did these great battles.
Mhm.
And then she brought them all back into herself, and she killed the demon, and he fell down, and then everything was wonderful again, right? So you have this whole story arc, but there's lots of stuff that goes on in the story that helps you kind of work out what's going on in your life. So I think that's one way that story works. And then and I think it would be really interesting to talk about places where we do that in our magical practice. You do it with Hercules, and it's built into what the ancients did. We often enact the Eleusinian mysteries, which I'm not sure are stories so much as a set of rituals. But
Mhm.
are there other stories that inform our magical practice? And then there's the whole idea of initiation. So initiations are all often like you follow the story. You're enacting a story. And I can talk about the Freemasonic one because I'm not a Freemason. It's kind of mean that there's in the Master Mason story, there's the story of Hiram Abiff. So you take on the persona of Hiram Abiff, and you go through what Hiram went through. And then you come out the other side. So I think that and I again it's sort of a way of using story to get you from one place to another place in your spiritual journey. And I think there's a lot that can be talked about there, because the stories that we choose to enact so color our lives, and many of us choose really terrible stories, like Cinderella's like every girl, is held up, to the great ideal. So we all the girls look to marry well and someone who will take care of them and live happily ever after. And that's a really damaging story in our culture. So it's important to pick good stories too.
Oh, most definitely so. That's why I look for the best versions of the stories to
That's
experience.
so many, yeah. And when you say story, I think too, there's so many stories that are just terrible stories too in Greek culture, right? So you don't want to enact one of the like rapes, like for
No, no,
women in
no.
particular. Although I was just I was taking a class with Georgia Van Raalte, and she was talking about the importance of recognizing the initiatory aspects of trauma, and that's something that happens. And she specifically used the Eleusinian mysteries as an example. She said, look, they weren't gentle. They weren't like you sat around and you had a good time with your friends. You started out with 3 days of walking in the summer heat in Greece. Imagine that you were a pampered
Athena.
Greek woman, living in the house, and then you're walking all the way to Eleusis. So you're already like in that state, right? So it's a very interesting thought that maybe sometimes the traumatic stories also have something to teach us.
I believe that the more negative aspects, I guess you can call them, of the Hercules legends, I found very instructional also, because when people ask me why Hercules, didn't he throw somebody off a tower, didn't he like murder his family and things like that,
Yeah.
uh, I tell them that the story of Hercules is a reminder that human life is tough, even for the son of the chief god of a pantheon.
Yeah.
So this is not going to be an easy experience for the most part that we're experiencing here. Also, you can inadvertently hurt people with the best of intentions. So that's something to be very aware of as well. And thirdly, um, even if your life is tainted with things that you maybe should not have done, that does not mean that you can't still accomplish great things that are in service to everybody. So despite Hercules's criminality, according to these stories, he was still able to rid the world of monsters and topple tyrants and do things like that. So a lot of people now are afraid, because of things they did in their past, to step up and do something public or visible because of the criticism that they acknowledge getting. And looking at the news, you can see this. People are constantly like monkeys flinging poo at one another politically, in any way. So despite the fact that this is going to happen, you can expect it to happen, still you have in you the capacity to do great good and to do something of service to everybody. And he did become a god despite his faults. So that path too is not shut off to you. You don't have to wallow in a hell of flames and be tortured for all eternity. You can attain to the highest. Just keep going, keep trying to do your best, and that's what's important. So that's why that particular story reminds me of that all the time.
And it's interesting, one of the times that we've talked about this too, you mentioned that these days when people transgress against some public idea, they're ostracized and cut off. And you said that the story of Hercules teaches us that this is the moment when you step up and when there's some kind of atonement to be made. And then Hercules goes through, his labors are about an atonement.
Yes.
They're about making good on the harm that he has caused. So it's a very important story. And something that I think about too, as we were talking about this, is that you have Hercules as sort of the central figure in your life. And there's this idea that there's a one deity in theurgy. There's one deity that you relate to. There's this idea in Tantra, Ishta Devi, there's your deity. And I always have been like a priestess of all the gods, right? So like I really have a hard time choosing. There are deities that I gravitate to, but I kind of tend to collect the sets. So when I did theurgic practice, I did a year of theurgic practice where I did all of the Olympians. Yeah. I still have to write that up. A year of theurgic practice where I did every single Olympian like in month order. And so I think that exemplifies like ways you can approach this. You can have one deity and relate to that deity. You can relate to you, but theurgy is a way that teaches you to relate to deity. And I think that it does transcend the relating just to Greek deities or Kemetic Egyptian deities because it came from there, or Indian deities because it came from there. But you can take the same set of techniques and relate to a deity, any deity that calls you to them.
And this will sound shocking to some, blasphemous to others, but it works even with fictive pantheons.
Ah, you're right.
Like
And you're really good at
universes.
finding those, Hercules.
What happened?
You're really good at finding those things that might shock people or challenge them. It's hard to do in these contexts, but you do find those places, and I think it's fantastic. It's a great it's a true talent, because we do need to like look at this stuff. But yeah, absolutely. Taylor Elwood talks about that, I think, in some of his work about picking up what's out there in the ether, what's out there in the contemporary culture, and then bringing that into what we do.
I've interviewed him. He did, I think, pop culture magic, I think he called it, or something like that. Yeah.
Pop culture magic. Yeah. He's a publisher, so he's a good guy to know.
Yeah, he was on and he was talking about it, and we talked about his book, and I was meant to have him back on, but life blurs. So maybe it's time to contact him since he popped up in conversation. Yeah,
I think that's how Hermes works. He sort of brings stuff in, like the UFO thing. It keeps coming up,
so something. I also honor the other gods, and I recognize that they're in me as well. Because again, we're one, and everything is in you. I resonate most powerfully, and I identify most with Hercules. But as I get older, people are calling me Zeus now when they see me. It's no longer, hey, that's Hercules. Lately, people have been calling me Zeus. So that's opened up a whole other path. In Nonus, Hercules and Zeus and Kronos are the same entity at different stages of its development. And even Ares is said to be part of that spectrum in some texts I've come across. So that opened up a whole new understanding of Hercules for me.
Oh, that's interesting. And I think one of the ideas that I've encountered in the Neoplatonists is that the Olympians are sort of classification. They're the henads, the ones, but they encompass other deities in their train. So Demeter would encompass Persephone, her daughter, and Persephone is her own goddess, but she's also like in that, when you go up to that level, the top 12, she's there. And so Hercules would be in the sphere of Zeus in the henads.
Yes, and I'm finding the Kronos part of it, which I guess I had difficulty with during the early parts of my life, where I rebelled against, authority and tradition and things like that. I'm finding now that that's the part that provides organization, and I rely very heavily on organizational skills for what I do. So I need, even though I'm not I'm not obsessively organized. For the things I want to do, I have to be very organized. And those are Kronos's gifts. Like Zeus's gift, and I had difficulty there with Zeus for quite a while, is vision.
Hmm.
The greater idea, the vision that gives life to societies, to organizations, to movements. You know, that's the gift of Zeus. Zeus is nous. They rhyme for a reason. And I'm seeing as I move through different parts of my life, like when I was younger, it was to do. That's Hercules' thing, to do, you know, and I would create in my career in psychiatric rehabilitation, different programs in different places to get people from point A to point B by dealing with different types of stressors. And you know, so that was something I did. Those are my labors, I guess, you know, continuously. I was doing that all the time. And then now as I'm getting older, it's my vision. What do I want to see? What do I see? What do I want to gift the world with before I go? And now that I'm in Kronos too, because I'm in my 60s, it's okay, I can make this happen. I have the skills. I just need to, you know, sit down and yes, synchronicities are going to happen. Thank you, Hermes. Yes, I need my vision to fuel this. But what I need to make it happen is these organizational skills, you know, that come into structuring things. That's Kronos's gift. And not fighting against it, allowing it to become part of me, has liberated me. So a lot of the tensions I felt toward different aspects of humanity, I guess, that I was wrestling with in the external world, I was able to let go of it because it's no longer a conflict. It's no longer a fight. It's no longer a battle. Now it's just a different stage in the journey. It's a different rung on a ladder.
Well, I have to say, I think that you do one of these a day, right? I mean, every single day
Yeah.
you have a show you tape. So that's definitely in the realm of Kronos. To have something you do every single day, Kronos has got to be pretty strong in your life.
And it's okay. He's not a bad guy once you get to
It's
know.
okay. So I think to conclude, I think that theurgy is something that you can do in the Hellenic world, but we're talking about theurgy in a much broader context and bringing it back to witchcraft. Witchcraft was one of the ways to sort of start to broaden that conversation out. And I think that's our hour. So that's how I'd like to end.
Wow, time flies. You're absolutely right. Thank you, Brandy. You're incredibly awesome. And I cannot wait for this adventure to proceed. And I'm looking forward to next month already.
Me too. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Good night. And thanks everybody for tuning in. This will be posted on YouTube by midnight tonight.
Excellent.